Recording. Hello.
Yay. Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are at our literary circle for the book March, Book 1. This is a book that focuses on the life of John Lewis, and we want to share some of our thoughts and ideas with you today. Our group consists of Imelda and Brenda and Renee and me, Penny. So I hope you enjoy our discussion. I'm going to take the first question, and Imelda is going to be moderating facilitating the literary circle for us. The first question I want to present to everybody is, what do you believe the comparative and contrasting characteristics and relationships between John and his chickens are and John and his family? So basically, how do you think John treats his family different from how he treats the chickens? And what is that relationship? And what do you think which do you think is a stronger bond? And which do you feel he's closest to from the text?
So, do you want me to answer?
Yep.
Okay.
Let's see. And if y'all remember, I guess the pages that we're looking at were around page 27 to 35 in the book. Mm-hmm. And it kind of starts, the part I'm talking about is the part that starts in his office when the two little boys are looking at the chickens, and they kind of say, "Chickens, why do you have chickens everywhere?" And then he goes into the story about, how he took care of the chickens when he was young.
Let me see.
And just as a background for the audience, John Lewis's family, they had like a farm, and that's why he took care of the chickens. Like, he was naturally attached to raising and taking care of those chickens. Like, the dad, I think, was in charge of the farm, and he kind of used it as profit for his family. So the farm isn't just some random thing; it's like his background. So
yes.
And I also went back and looked, and the farm was bought 2 months prior to when he was born. So the same year, which was 1940, is when he bought the farm, and Lewis was born February 24th of the same year. So it said the spring of 40 was purchased. So he was born right when that farm was purchased. So I think that has a lot to do with how hard his father actually worked on the farm, and maybe the lack of relationship maybe with his son. But as far as the relationship with his mother, it talks of how she was read the Bible to him in stories, but it's far more communicating with the chickens and his feelings with the chickens and how he related to them than what he mentioned in the story. So it feels like he's even closer to those chickens than he is his parents.
Yeah, it's almost like his chickens are like the future flock, kind of resembling. So
yeah, and especially when he was preaching to them, even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting because the whole thing about the chickens, it seemed like he related to the chickens, and they were like, when he walked into the chicken coop, he didn't just walk in, he actually talked to them before he scurried them out into the yard to eat. And I mean, he would stay with them and talk to them and preach to them. And it was almost like the chickens were kind of his confidant before he decided what he was going to do and where he was going to go. He almost used the chickens to kind of talk through his life and what his needs were. And it just got, he really had a thing for these chickens. Let me say.
I agree. It felt like a very deep bonding relationship.
Yeah, especially like I couldn't believe that, how he was with the chickens as far as the one he was trying to save, revive, because he almost drowned it. And
his favorite chicken.
Yeah.
and the fact that when they did die or pass away, that he buried them and had a service for them, and then he didn't eat chicken on the table. So,
They were his life.
In the 40s and 50s, if you didn't eat what was provided, the meat that was provided on the farm, so he forwent, I should say, nutrition because of the love of those chickens as well, sacrifice.
And I think it shows some kind of foreshadowing to his future, because if you notice, the chicken that got stuck in the well for 5 days.
Right.
How many people would spend 5 days trying to get a chicken out of a well?
Yeah. And
it was like the least of these. He's spending 5 days trying to get this chicken out of this well.
Right.
To save it. So, and I think he was doing that later on in his life for the whole of, his people.
Right.
Trying to save them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so his chickens were almost like they were linked to the people he was actually fighting for, to have like freedom and rights, and like why he was doing all this for. He cared like the chickens about, it's the same as he did the people. Like he fought for the chickens as he did for the freedom of everybody he was trying to get the rights to and all that.
Mm-hmm.
If you look on page 26, I think a lot of it is also him starting off again, like with his future career and his future aspirations. Because if on page 26, the young guy who talks to Mr. Lewis, he says, "If you love chicken so much, why didn't you become a chicken farmer?" And he says, "I suppose there are many reasons growing up. What I really wanted to be was a preacher." And so I think the chicken served as his audience, and I think he used it not because, yes, he did love the chickens, but I think it was more metaphorical. So he used it as practice, and he pictured himself as the actual preacher. Because then on page 28, he says, "I imagined that they were my congregation, and me, I was a preacher." And I think that essentially, I think I felt that page was the beginning of the whole book. Like that was it. Like that's how I knew this was gonna be him proposing his duties as far as him in the movement and stuff.
Yeah.
Did you notice too that, how his parents reacted to the chicken? Here he had little, burial plots everywhere. And when he told about his parents wringing the neck and, killing the chickens, and then they put it before him in dinner. Did you notice he never said anything to his parents, or I didn't catch that he said anything to his parents? It's almost like his parents were the establishment, and he never went against them.
Right. There was obvious respect for his parents.
Never defiant.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is so weird because later in life, he went against the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, his at that point, his nonviolent protest may have been not eating, sitting there not eating.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want to eat the chickens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any more thoughts before we go to Renee?
I think we covered it pretty good.
Okay.
All right. So Lewis began his preaching with chickens. Early on in life, John knew he wanted to work at something that would change society. Ultimately, this ended up being change for the African American community. How do you feel his desire to be a preacher affected his approach to nonviolent forms of protest to achieve civil equality?
Well, I think first and foremost, the whole point about peace, where his values were from the Bible, wasn't violent. It wasn't the violence was not the natural reaction of who he was. It was the peace and fairness from his Christian values from the Bible, where I think that affected him as far as being the preacher and being able to just see all mankind as created equal.
Yep.
And and I also believe that obviously when he was according to the book, that when he was at the church, and I believe it was Nashville, and also when he heard Dr. King there again, it was biblical. It was from the pulpit preaching this freedom for all, and natural, the natural of equality.
Yep.
I think that if I'm looking at page 54, I think one of the things that hugely made an impact with him, as far as being preaching, is when on page 54, when it says, you know, the newspaper article came out and it says segregation in schools outlawed. And he was so excited. I mean, he was really built up. He's like, you know, finally we're going to be treated equal, and I'm going to get to go to I'm going to get to ride on a nice bus and go to a nice school and all that stuff. But then it's kind of like everybody wasn't excited, and he was kind of really disappointed when he went to church, and the people that he had been thought was just it. The pastor were not saying anything.
Right.
They wasn't saying anything about desegregating. They wasn't saying anything about segregation being outlawed, and it really seemed like it hurt him.
I agree.
And then he started noticing they're driving nice cars and stuff like this, kind of like they're bought off.
Right.
They're been bought off by the establishment. Those things aren't going to get better.
Right. And I think until that maturity level of when he moved to Nashville, and then when the exposure of other, I don't want to necessarily say cultures, but other experiences of people like-minded, maybe even, the same skin color. When he was there at that college, he was open-minded, and he received what others had to say. Then he got involved in the church and got involved in that first, let's see, what was the initials? FOR, that Troy State, when he was at Troy State. That was spring of 58, I believe it was. So when he got involved in that first group of people who were talking of peaceful, the training, that initial training, I mean, I think from that point on, he realized, okay, maybe this really is my purpose, and I can help the most people in this manner.
And even as a young boy, he respected life.
Yes.
Like when he buried his chickens and everything like that. So he's always, that's just, it started very young, and then I guess everything just kind of grew with him as he grew. And that, I think too, that showed that he valued individuals.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
I agree.
So, and it showed an excitement too, I think, when he first heard Martin Luther King Jr. When he heard that, he became excited again. Exactly. I think he kind of burst his bubble in his own community that nothing was changing.
Right.
And then it's kind of naiveness to think that, okay, segregation's ended, and tomorrow we're going to be riding the nice buses. And you think about what actually happened, all the struggles they went through. The first, girl that walked into school, what struggles she went through to just, get inside the school doors. It wasn't an easy thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see he really hoped.
Right.
He had a lot of passion, like you said, hope, passion. He had respect for individuals. He was like, I guess, more noble, I guess you would say. He cared for just life itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think it was also strive, and I think he felt, and I think he even says it. I'm trying to look for the page, but he said that he started to feel guilty that he didn't. It felt like he needed to do more, and let's see if I can find it. But he was just, here it is. He said, page 65. I love the new ideas college was introducing me to in religion and philosophy, but I couldn't stop thinking about the social gospel. Here I was reading about justice, when there were brave people out there working to make it happen. Oh, and then right here, I started to feel guilty for not doing more, and I became restless.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where he was like, okay, I'm going to contact lawyers, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to start something.
Right.
He's like, he didn't settle for just learning. He wanted to go above and beyond that milestone and actually make a difference.
Right.
Yeah. And I think up to that point, he was somewhat really internalizing everything. It was all about him. And I think at that point, when he says, I became restless, I felt guilty, is he realized there are more people out here who are going through the same struggles as him. And it's time he did something about it.
Right.
And he wasn't going to stop until he did.
Yeah.
Right.
Even when he was when he got put in jail and everything.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Does anybody have any more comments on that one?
I don't think so. No. All right, so I'll ask a question. Especially as educators, I found it very interesting that John was even trying to, even after the book stated when his father said, you have to stay home, you're not allowed to go to school, and he would sneak on the school bus so he could go to school and learn. So my question is, what do you think was the main motivator for John to learn as a young student? And again, as an educator like the librarian in the book, I would like to know just how to motivate students. Do you think it was a family member or a teacher or just some inner drive that he had, or just drive that he wanted to do something more than just being on the farm? Any thoughts on that?
I think he wanted change, and he understood education was something that couldn't be taken away from him. And his inner drive for equality and for all individuals, I think, drove a lot of that.
Yeah. But didn't you think it was odd, even when he got his college degree, it didn't mention that at all? Like if he valued that college education and the trouble that he went to get to Nashville and even to try to get somewhere else, I was surprised that was not in his book at all.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I think the main motivator for him is that school bus ride? Because especially when like I was looking at page 4, when you look at like page 48, I think I had 48 to 50 is very impactful about what is motivating him, what is changing his life.
Right.
And this is basically it might start on 47, right when he got back from with Uncle Otis, his visit with Uncle Otis.
It was Uncle Otis, yeah.
And when he got back, he was so excited to come back from see his family. He had missed his family so much. And then when he got back, he was a changed person, and he started looking at that bus ride, and he started, like it says, the country didn't bother paving roads into colored communities unless it was necessary for white traffic to pass through.
Yeah.
He started, after that trip, he really started noticing the differences. Our bus itself was old, hand-me-down, just like our school books. I realized how old it was when we finally climbed onto the pavement highway in the main road, running east to Troy and past the white children's bus.
Right.
And then he says, he keeps on, he notices the picture where he's watching as he's traveling in that bus. He looks out the window and he's seeing this row of black prisoners, and all the prisoners are black. And then he's seeing all the black people out in the field working. And he said you couldn't help but notice. So as he's riding in that bus, he's thinking about what is the role of colored people in our society? Where is our place in society? Mm-hmm. And then he said, despite everything that confronted me on the way to school, I was in heaven once I stepped inside it. Okay, so his heaven was getting education and finding a way out. So to me, his main motivation was that bus trip.
Yeah,
changed his life.
Right. I agree that when he came back, he was a changed boy in an unchanged society here in the South where he was. No doubt about it. Are you there? Hello? Great.
To go to school, like what other student nowadays would do that, And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he wasn't given as much opportunity to be able to sit in a classroom and be able to learn from not only teachers, but like the people around him. And then I also think, Brenda, you mentioned the librarian.
Right.
He said, I loved going to the library. It was the first time I ever saw black newspapers in magazines like Jet, Ebony, the Baltimore Afro-American, or the Chicago Defender. And I think his biggest motivator is seeing people like him, the same color, doing something for themselves.
Yeah.
And he saw it as a role model, and I think him seeing that just gave him that boost to say, you know, if they can do it, if I can see that, then maybe I can put myself in that same position.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did anybody have anything else to add?
The library, I think, also impacted his life. He got to see the African American media sources and like the magazines and how the others outside of the South live as well.
Yeah.
Like I would think.
Yeah.
So my question, I guess it worked out well because of Brenda's question, but with this book, as far as it being educational and being motivational for others, we are obviously going into the elementary area, so like kindergarten through 6th grade, typically. Maybe it'll be different in the future, but how would you use this for, like, what grade level, or how would you use this to teach students about civil rights? Clearly it has a lot of history, like we've saw a lot throughout. It was like a timeline basically, but there was also some things that I feel like, not me personally, but there's a lot of things that students or parents or even other teachers might use as censorship. And that was my question, was how did you guys interpret this as far as using it in the classroom?
Right.
Because it is tough stuff to learn, and it is tough stuff to teach. So you as prospective teachers, how would you use it?
Right.
Well, Brenda, did you want to go?
Well, I was just going to say that I thought personally that, middle school, I think, would be a good age to this. And I thought I actually did it myself just to get the time frame in line. And we kind of mentioned it earlier, is if students could do a timeline, that would be a great activity for them to do from the beginning to the end. So the beginning of, like, when he was born in 1940 into the Obama inauguration. So I thought that would be an excellent activity for middle school students and to be engaged in learning.
And probably where I see it fitting the best, because usually 2nd grade is like communities, 3rd grade is more like international holidays and learning international. 4th grade is all focused on North Carolina. So you could start introducing, because it talks about the sit-ins, but I don't know that I would introduce the book until around 5th grade.
Yeah.
5th grade it would fit good in, because in 5th grade you study for social studies, you study the United States and the history of the United States. And to me, this just fits right in there, because it was such a huge chunk because it was a huge chunk in our history in the last 100 years. It also, though, I see if you wanted to read this as kind of an introduction, but 6th grade is where it really hits. Because in 6th grade, you do a lot with Black history. Usually in 6th grade, you start doing Black history reports. And usually you do a lot around civil rights and stuff in that time period. And in 6th, I think it's not until 8th grade when you study the wars, like the Lincoln and, the different wars. So it really would gauge to late elementary school, middle school.
I think like you said, it's geared more towards either older elementary or middle school. I think it's a lot of detail, and I also think when they introduce Black History Month, I think it would be a very appropriate time to maybe introduce this to the class, or to that grade, and maybe even have them just write maybe like a small paper or like a small essay on their opinion of it and how they would interpret it, because it is like you said, geared towards older elementary rather than the younger elementary. I don't think they could understand it quite as well. But I do think there's a lot of symbolism in the book too,
Right.
that fifth graders may learn about when you do like symbolism and all that, or sixth, seventh grade. I think they can do a lesson in that and do like how the chickens symbol, the people, and how just like all the there's a lot of symbols in the book that just everything kind of like fits together like a puzzle piece. Like when he was younger, how he did things, and all his experiences like on the farm, and his family and him having to take care of the chickens and do all the farm stuff, and everything that drove him to be the person he is when he grows up, how his childhood and all his experiences link to how when he's an adult. And I think that'd be a good discussion to have with their class or that grade too.
Yeah. Okay, my next question is, what do you perceive John's turning point or decision-making point was in his life to determine if he was going to continue in his family's lifestyle or pursue another direction? What were some of the factors you felt impacted his decision?
I feel that John Lewis, he realized at an early age that he wanted to be more than just a farmer, and he wanted to do more than what his family had done. He wanted to like rise above, and I think that he wanted to skip out on working on the farm, and he wanted to attend school and prove his desire for education, and just be the best person he can be. And I think he had a lot of drive to do that, and he went through a lot of obstacles, and I don't think he was going to stop, until he got there.
Mm-hmm. I think that one of the things that impacted his life tremendously was his uncle. Now, I don't know if it's the same uncle it referenced in the front of the book as it was his Uncle Otis, that where they made the trip. That was June 1951 when he made that trip north. He was 11 years old. And I think the freedoms that he saw with Black people living in the same neighborhood as white students, and being able to go to the grocery store, being able to go shopping, I think that must have been a tremendous impact on him at that age of 11. So I have to think that his Uncle Otis had a lot to do with that. Mm-hmm. And just pouring into his life that he did, and always thought he was special and something different and unique. And he lived up to it.
Mm-hmm. He did.
I also think it's a lot about him being told no, or to, stay quiet, or watch out, or I think things like that is what drove him to do what he did. And I think it was a lot of what he saw as well. He didn't feel that he felt like it previously. We talked about how he felt he needed to do more, and just the fact that they were telling him, no, you should just stay and put and just let it go. But I think that was his biggest struggle, is letting it go, because he knew that it was something that he shouldn't, that he should change, and he wouldn't let anyone else hold him back, despite who they were.
Mm-hmm. I think it, from listening to y'all, there were several points that were turning points, or like steps in his journey to what he decided to do. And I agree with all of them. I think one of the things too that may have been another thing that plays into, they say you have points in your life that are like decision making, turning points. But I think one of the points of his life that had a huge impact, and I don't know that he really realized it, but he must have, because it's in the book, is when he was 5 and his mother gave him a gift, and the gift she gave him was the Bible. And I think that turned or had a huge impact to what he valued and where he placed his values for the rest of his life, in addition to all the other times y'all mentioned.
Mhm.
I think he had to be older to really determine what he was going to do with it, but I think that started a passion in his heart.
Mhm. Yep, I can see that.
Okay, Renee?
Okay. Okay, so following the rest from his first sit-in, what do you think gave John motivation to continue his pursuit of helping achieve equal rights?
Okay, and that's like around page 102? Yeah.
Yes.
102. Okay.
Well, I think
You know what? I think it is. Oh, go ahead.
it's okay. I was just going to say that I think part of the motivation is he began to see just a spark of change in the beginning, and then it was It was on a continuum. Then more people got involved. They became bigger. They became all across the South. It wasn't just a few people in one city. It became lots of people, and I think he realized that on the movement was positive, and it was making changes. I think that had to be the motivator. Had to be the motivator.
He saw the progress.
Right.
Yep, and that things were. Yep, that's it. He saw progress, and that, like you said, things were changing and becoming different, and all of his like fighting for everything he fought for and doing everything he did, I think is starting to pay off just a little bit, giving him that spark and that motivation to continue.
I agree. And on page 104, it says the part that makes me, really drives you home is he says, here he is in jail, and he says, we're jubilant as we fill the jail cell. I mean,
Right.
And he says, okay, they're happy. Here they are singing. We're not alone. I mean, they're singing, they're joyous,
Right.
and they're jubilant that what they're doing is effective. And I love the part that they stayed in jail instead of getting out,
Right.
which really aggravated the police. I was like, yes, because they wanted to inflict more pain on them by making them pay, but they were happy.
Mhm.
They didn't pay. They would stay there as long as they need to stay there.
Right.
And which is not what the police was trying to do. So I love it. But anyway.
Right. Exactly. All right. So should I go on to another question? Does anybody else have anything to add?
You can go.
Okay. So I guess this is kind of the same time period here in the book, a little before and after. But I guess my questions, I would like to have seen more, and I guess I'm going to have to read book 2 and 3 now, right? But I wanted to know, how in the world did John have time to focus on his studies, but yet be able to organize and lead such a powerful, movement? And at the same time, where did all this, how did they get money to do this? I want to know more. And so did he temporarily pause his studies, and how did he fund it? And also, how in the world did you weigh the time versus the risk, all the risks that were involved? Because obviously his parents did weigh risk versus cost and chose not to be a part of it. So I was just, I don't know. And the last part of that is today. Do you think that a group of people could ever organize as well as they did to make a positive change?
That, by the way, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that, by the way, would lead to my question, which is comparing the book and what you saw or what you read. How can you compare and contrast the protests and the situations that we have today.
Right.
Is it possible that we could do something as big as what we saw, or is it that we are doing something as big as what we see and we just can't compare it the same because it's different times? Or what are your thoughts on that?
You know, going to what Brenda's asking about first, you know, I was wondering myself, how in the world did he afford to go to college? You know, I kept thinking, you know, he had to travel and he had to live in another place. Did he stay with family? Did he not stay with family? But how did he afford to do all that, considering, like, when his father bought the land, he used everything he had?
Right.
So I too was wondering, because, you know, back then with everything going on, they probably were not offering any scholarships.
Mhm.
So I don't know how he did, unless somebody took him under wing, which is what I was thinking. Maybe somebody took him under wing, and because remember it said that he was preaching at the age of 16.
Correct.
He already got some notoriety. He already had his picture taken. He had already gotten some press. So he may have been getting influence from that where he made the right connections.
Mm.
Is the only thing I could figure out. How in the world was he affording school? And then it said, I don't know how he had time to focus on his studies, really. I'm thinking, well, maybe classes, if you go into ministry classes, maybe they do a lot more community activity, because I know I took some social work classes, and you did a lot of community activity. You were out in the community all the time. So I'm thinking maybe because of the area of study, that it may have led to him being able to do more of that.
Okay.
So that's my thoughts.
Yeah.
I think too, the purpose is far more powerful than the concept of him finding time to do it. And I think education and his support of the movement were his first priorities. And I think he chose to sacrifice the rest of his college experiences and a lot of just a lot of his life and a lot of time. And I think he had passion and desire and the appropriate justification with the correct avenue, I think. But I think for sure it can, like everything he did, he accomplished it, and he I think everything, he was successful. He had a lot of things he had to come across and battle and overcome, but in the end I think just like he made like such a big change, and we just ultimately so successful, and you know, started them organizations and just created a lot of like without him I don't think the whole civil rights movement, I don't think, you know, any of it would be what it is and what it was.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
It made me wonder how, I mean, yes, I wonder how he got through school. I wonder how, you know, he became a minister. But it also made me wonder, how do you go from ministry to being a congressman?
Again, you're going to have to read book 2 and 3 with me.
Yeah.
So we can figure out the rest of the story.
Yeah.
But I did think he obviously had some notoriety, because in one area, I don't know if I can put my finger on the page, but even when you know, Dr. King spoke when he, you know, on the mall, when he had the "I Have a Dream" speech, he also spoke at that exact same gathering. So I think that he spoke before Dr. King, if I'm not mistaken. Does anybody recall?
Yeah, he was like speaker like 13 or something out of so many.
Right. Okay. I thought I had remembered reading that that he was there. So he obviously had supporters in churches as well, supporting him. So, but you're right. His heart, his passion was obviously were his people.
Okay, does anybody want to say anything else on Brenda's question before I jump to Melda's? Imelda, can you restate your question again?
Yeah, I'm still looking for Brenda's answer as far as like how he afforded college. Because, yeah, okay. So my question was, so we see all these protests and all these life-changing events from this time era, and my question was, how can we compare and contrast those protests and the ones we've seen in our time? Maybe not specifically with racial discrimination, but just protesting in general. Do you think it's as violent? What's changed? What hasn't changed? What could we do better? I guess there's some of the questions that I'm offering for answers.
Mhm. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the difference between peaceful and violent walks and protests. And I don't think they get as much attention as what it meant then when a group of people gathered together. I think now that, people, it's like, oh, well, there's a group with a common cause or a common theme, and okay, there they are, and that's the end of it. It doesn't have the same impact. That's for sure as well.
I think, to piggy off what Brenda's saying, a lot of the protests nowadays are violent. In this book, it talks about how they had a list that they read, and this was the way you were going to behave, and this is the way you're going to act in a protest. And it was going to be nonviolent. And you see the pictures of people getting, chocolate syrup poured over their heads and, being defamed and everything when they're actually in the sit-ins. And they didn't react. They just stood there. But, I mean, the non-protesters were violent, but they didn't cross the line with violence. They did stuff to humiliate people. Whereas today, it seems like a lot of the protests are violent. They actually get together and determine the violence that they're going to cause or the harm they're going to cause to individuals. And one thing about the protests in the 60s, they all had a common cause. I mean, it was common. They all knew what their goal was. They all had, were trying to do the same thing,
Right.
the same way. It reminds me like, Gandhi, And today, nobody has a common cause. It's like a lot of times the violent protests that go on, you talk to everybody in the crowd and they all think they're there for a different reason. So it's not a movement. The civil rights was a movement. Mm-hmm. Today, it's not a movement. It's kind of everybody's haphazardly wanting to get their 5 minutes of fame. And that's the way I see it. Personally, in the civil rights movement, they wanted to help people, to make people's lives better, to change and that's the common goal of everybody, was how to make people's lives better. There were people who were suffering, who were being treated differently, who were, in pain and, suffering. And the movement was to stop the suffering, to stop the pain. And nowadays, when I see protests, it seems like the protests are to cause pain. They're not trying to help. They're trying to hurt. So that's my opinion. I mean, I know that can be controversial. Yeah, definitely. But today, I just feel like people are angry. They're reacting out of anger. Mm-hmm. And I get that these people, they were not really angry. They actually, were prayed for the people that came against them and forgave the people that came against them. But today's movement is anger, full of anger. So, that's my 2 cents.
It is the protest back for in the civil rights, like you said, it was more of a structured protest, and like you said, a less violent protest. And I think the protests, not that they had more meaning than they do today, but they were for such different causes. And the protests that people have today, they are very violent, and they're more physical, and it's like you said, people want to protest to just like bash one another and more hurt one another than to actually stand up for what they believe in and prove a point. It's more for who's right, who's wrong. It's just for total they just want to be so not violent, but I'm trying to think of another word. I can't even think of it, but I agree with what you're saying, that the protests are different than how they were back then. But they're also very similar, because I even back then, I think that people had not bad intentions, but it's like, I think they were similar, but yet they were different. I do think that people could still be, and a lot of protesters today, I don't think they even know why they're protesting. I think it's more of, following the leader, joining a crowd just to do it, just to protest, not like when the civil rights were, they had a meaning, and they knew why they were doing it. It was for a cause, not just, oh, I'm going to protest because so-and-so is protesting or that group's protesting.
And just to be clear, you guys, and maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way, or I'm listening the wrong way, but there was indeed still violence in the protests in the civil rights movement. Not the protesters, but the outcome of it, as far as they didn't fight back, which is true, but there was indeed a lot of violence. There was a lot of beating. And I need to make that clear, especially for the audience.
Yeah, you're right.
There is pictures here where there's beatings and stuff. But yeah, and so do you think that protesting is less effective now than it was back then because of the way we do it, or do you think it's just looked at differently?
Well, I think even in that, I think the roles have changed. It seemed like then the violence actually came from the people who were the people who were on the defense. Nowadays, the violence is coming from the offense. So I think that's what I see as different.
Okay.
So I don't know that if you're on the offense, is your message getting across? It's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of it today is too, I think a lot of protesting today is from social media.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has changed, as well as how we protest. So we may not be doing as many sit-ins or in front of places. We're speaking through technology, and I think that also creates a difference in the way we try to convey and try to spread our message.
Yeah, and I think that people in the civil rights movement, I think that they had a lot of pride for who they were. They were very hardworking individuals, and they were not full. I mean, I'm surprised they were not full of a lot of anger, and they just stood up for what they were standing up for themselves. And I feel like in society today, we just all need to be respectful of each other. And even when they were protesting, they actually put themselves in the place of the people that were being violent to them, and were forgiving of them.
Yeah.
And we're all human. We need to be about the common good for everybody. We're not going to agree. I mean, society is not going to agree wholeheartedly on everything. But we need to be able to work together.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Okay.
Does anybody have anything else?
Um,
Okay, Renee, you want to close us up?
yes. Okay, so we all went, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I feel, overall, I feel that the book gave a great insight into the life of John Lewis, and it gave us all a vision of his experience and his life during the 1960s and the civil rights movement. He came from a less fortunate family and background, but he found an escape through. He found an. I think he found an escape through the education, which led him and his quest to help African Americans and civil rights equality. And I think it was a great book, and I would definitely recommend it for reading and for teachers to use in their classrooms for upper elementary and middle school to introduce this. And that's pretty much it.
Renee, I'd also like to say I looked up, it has a 5.5 reading level as well.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, good.
Yeah.
So would you guys read the next 2 books, or are you guys like done?
No, I think I am going to read them.
Yeah.
They're at the public library, so I can check them out.
Oh, good.
All right, so this
Okay,
concludes our session. So I'm going to stop the recording now.